Murder Drones is my favorite glitch show, and the characters are my favorite part of it. That's why I'm here to go over each character one at a time and explore them on a much deeper level, with the goal being to help casual fans understand the characters better, possibly remind old fans of a thing or two, and maybe even clear up any potential misunderstandings. However, if you're a new fan who hasn't seen the series through yet, just be aware that this is not a substitute. With that said, no better place to start than the show's main character, Uzi Dorman. But before we get into details, we gotta recap the basics. Uzi is a social outcast who seems to be the epitome of angsty teen, and given edginess has been on a constant downfall since 2011, this may not be the most promising first impression for new fans of the show. However, it thankfully doesn't take too long to see that Uzi's personality is more complicated than that, and by going through her story, we can start to understand her on a much deeper level. Right out the gate in the pilot, Uzi's presentation immediately shows that she's more of a free thinker. Though we also see just as quickly that issues with self-esteem and social awareness tend to get in her way. She is fully aware her gun doesn't work in its current state, but psyching herself out over this leads to her turning it on anyway. Explosion ensues. Later, she says she needs a specific part for it to function, which is also proven right, so it's clear she really does have a perfect understanding of the science behind what she's doing, and is therefore very intelligent. It's just that her emotional flaws tend to result in rash decisions. Later on, the situation of N breaking into the colony shows us more. This is once again a mistake brought on by Uzi, as she blatantly admits to, only this one is a danger far beyond just herself. The entire colony is at risk. Her response to this is, without hesitation, putting the responsibility of fixing this on herself. The reason this is notable is because, if you remember, barely anyone in this entire colony has ever shown her an ounce of consideration. They forget she exists on a constant basis. To still make this choice is her choosing to do what's right over getting caught up on her own feelings, which not only shows selflessness in a character whose archetype is expected to be the opposite, but is also a big step forward for her when you remember the previous railgun incident. This isn't the only time either. When Uzi discovers there's been disappearances within the colony, she immediately jumps on it. Now, in the moment, it's played off as conspiracy nut stuff, but the moment she's thrown in the deep end of what's going on and suspects it could be another potential colony-wide disaster, her immediate instinct is to put a stop to it again. The problem ends up being different than what she thought, but she still makes the decision to act on what she thinks is the right thing to do, even though Dahl spells out that Uzi literally has no reason to act on V's behalf. Uzi retorts that they all need to step back and instead address the greater scope problem, picking up on the fact that this problem exists with the bits she did and realizing they are all victims of it shows pretty great insight. So far, Uzi has some personality flaws, but at the end of the day, she is a good person at heart with some fairly impressive traits. The question now is, where do those flaws come from? But before we answer that question, we should look at how Uzi and N interact throughout the series. During the pilot, Uzi tends to see N as a means to an end, putting value on what he can do to help her do what she wants. Over the next couple episodes, however, they have bonded, to the point that pushing him away in panic riddles her with guilt. After apologizing and teaming up again, his lack of hesitation to put himself at risk for her sake only causes that underlying care for him to grow into a romantic affection. This attraction continues to linger in the back of Uzi's mind throughout the next episode, where despite heading to a camp for the purpose of finding leads on her newly discovered solver powers, she can't help but feel distressed at the idea that N would eventually move on and forget about her, as many other people do. Of course, having N's former love interest mock her about the same topic doesn't help, and eventually the idea of losing N becomes the emotional catalyst that causes her solver powers to backfire and send her into a frenzied state. When knocked out of it, she immediately puts faith in the idea N could help her, but of course, V denying Uzi the chance to see him sends her right back into the frenzy. Cue V getting her ass kicked, and N promising Uzi that he'll stick by her side. From this point forward, the two are pretty much dating and remain this way, the main exception being their brief fallout in episode 7, this time caused by a rash freakout on N's part, which he then has to make up for by choosing Uzi's life over someone he knew a long time ago, though we'll talk about this specific scene in his episode. Now you may ask why their relationship relates to Uzi's flaws, and the answer is the same reason they grew closer in the first place: acceptance. Uzi and N were outcasts in their circles, and they were able to bond over that. N unconditionally accepted Uzi as a person, accepted her for who she was, which is something she never got from anybody else before. The fact that she could never find acceptance no matter where she looked is what built her angsty personality, specifically her impulses to act like she has everything under control at all times and prove herself independent. But now that she's fully cemented the fact she's with N in her mind, she doesn't really need those barriers anymore, which, believe it or not, likely solves one of the biggest problems fans have with the series finale. From what I've heard, some people tend to pin a lot of the things Uzi can do on plot armor, and while I have a suspicion those people are not watching this video, I still feel that as someone who has researched this series as much as I have, I should say that I heavily disagree with the notion. Uzi has been in near-death scenarios several times throughout the show, and her ability to get out of them usually comes down to two things. One is that her opponent has a genuine flaw to exploit, such as Jay running her mouth when she really doesn't need to, and Sin teleporting directly behind Uzi so many times it becomes predictable. Or two, that being she has to use her solver powers at a magnitude she can't control, which does get her out of a situation but not without legitimate consequences. One of the only exceptions I can name is her getting rescued by N in episode 7, but the entire B-plot of the episode was the hellhole he had to go through to get to her, so I think this one's justified too. And as I said before, we can even explain her ability to start resisting the solver. The solver, as a concept, preys on others' trauma and insecurities. Sin uses these tactics to hunt and abuse others, meanwhile the strains of solver that others carry tends to show when they're under stress, and when those feelings spiral, it flares up even worse, with disastrous consequences. With N's positive influence, Uzi outgrows the insecurities she had, and therefore has the willpower to actually resist the influence of the solver as an entity, since it has nothing to exploit anymore. And with that, I think we've covered the deeper aspects of Uzi Dorman as a character. She has flaws, has reasons for them, and despite those flaws, is a good person at heart. I'd honestly say that's the kind of character who fits the hero role in a story very well, despite what Fight Till I'm Good Enough will try to tell you. Next time, I'm going to be covering N, and if I already have, it'll be right here. See you next time!